Before 1850, travel from Edinburgh to Dundee was a grueling experience. Despite the entire journey only being 46 miles, it took 3 hours and 12 minutes nearly to complete. You see, after departing from Waverley Station in Edinburgh at 6:25 a.m., the passengers would not only have to change trains 3 different times on the journey, but also cross the rivers of Forth and Tay. Yeah, it didn't take a dreamer or an expert to see a faster express service was needed, something that could and would cross those rivers. And little did anyone know the fruition of this dream would become that of a nightmare on the night of December 28, 1879. Now, the idea of bridging the Tay River was not a new one and caught the imagination of the entire nation. The first of the Tay bridges was designed by Thomas Bouch, a British engineer, and Bouch's plans proposed that of a latticed girder bridge, supported by piers resting on the bedrock, and also carrying a single railway line. It would take 85 spans in all, ranging in lengths from 28 feet to 285 feet. And in the center of the bridge, the railway would run inside of a bridge girder, thus giving clearance for the river shipping. But believe it or not, they did get it done. On July 15th of 1870, the North British Railway Tay Bridge Act received a royal assent, with the foundation stones being laid on July 22nd of 1871. Now, as great as things seem right now, there were several problems early on with construction. For starters, as the workers began to extend the structure into the river, it became clear very quickly the bedrock was much deeper than anticipated, leaving Bouch to return to the drawing board and make several accommodations. In addition to some of these piers resting on much wider bases, he also had to alter the spans themselves. Instead of 14 girders at 200 feet spans, there would be 13. And over the course of 6 years, 600 workmen had built a bridge of over 37,000 tons of cast iron, 3,500 tons of malleable iron, 87,000 cubic feet of timber, 15,000 casks of cement, 10 million bricks, and over 2 million rivets. According to James Cox, the chairman of the Tay Bridge undertaking, the Tay Bridge is a structure worthy of this enlightened age. On June 1st, 1878, the bridge was open for passenger traffic, and commercial travelers who once endured the agony of a double ferry crossing now expressed their delight with crossing the Tay so easily and comfortably, quote-unquote, with the sea mews beneath us. I mean, the bridge itself was even given the favor of Queen Victoria, who crossed the bridge on a return trip to Windsor. But sadly, as I'm sure you expected or maybe already knew, history would not look favorably upon the bridge forever. It was December 28th of 1887 when a severe storm rolled into Dundee. You see, despite the morning being a very clear and blue sky, by 4 o'clock it began to rain cats and dogs. The barometer fell sharply. Winds would pick up and start blowing out windows and causing significant damage all over Dundee. It was later estimated these winds had a gale force of between 10 and 11. At 7 o'clock that evening, John Wyatt sat in the Northern Railway signal box, directly next to the Tay Bridge, sharing a can of tea with his friend Thomas Barclay. It was 8 minutes past 7 when the signal bell rang, and Barclay signaled to the other signal box that a train was soon approaching, this being the train from Burtonsland to Dundee. At 12 minutes past 7, the train passed the cabin. Watt would keep a close watch over the train as it went over the bridge, or as best as he could in those conditions, and quietly remarked, "There is something wrong with that train." Watching the train through the window, it seemingly started to pick up speed. He saw the retiring of its 3 tail lamps, and then, suddenly, he saw a spray of sparks from its wheels that grew and merged into a steady flame. He watched this curiosity for 3 minutes until there was 3 distinct flashes, and then 1 great flash. Then there was darkness, and he could no longer see the tail lamps. What Watt had witnessed was the central spans of the bridge giving away. Over 160 yards of the bridge collapsed, taking an engine, 5 carriages, and a brake van with it. All 75 men, women, and children on board were killed. It should be noted newspapers at this time weren't the most reliable with the actual death count, but as things like this tend to do, words of the disaster spread very quickly over the wires. The readers of the morning paper in Dundee were greeted by a single column with 6-deck headlines declaring "Terrific Hurricane, Appalling Catastrophe at Dundee, Tay Bridge Down, and Passenger Train Hurled into River. Supposed Loss of 200 Lives." A court of inquiry was immediately developed to try and ascertain the reason for the bridge's collapse. After hearing 120 witnesses and asking 19,919 questions, the court concluded that the fall of the bridge was occasioned by insufficiency of the cross bracing and its fastening to sustain the force of the gale. Basically, the bridge in this design just didn't stand a chance against those wind speeds. Despite having received his knighthood shortly after the completion of the Tay Railway Bridge, the court held its principal engineer, Thomas Bouch, chiefly to blame for this collapse. The court, in its June 1880 report to Parliament, declared, "We ought not to shrink from the duty, however painful it may be, of saying with whom the responsibility for this casualty rests. It is our duty to say whom it applies. The conclusion to which we have come is that this bridge was badly constructed and badly maintained, and that its downfall was due to inherent defects in the structure, which must sooner or later have brought it down. Sir Thomas Bouch, in our opinion, is mainly to blame." And after this denouncement, Bouch withdrew from the public eye completely and purchased a country house in Moffat. The shock and distress to the mind was simply too much for Bouch. It was quite distressing. And sadly, this caused his already poor health to worsen. He passed away on October 30th of 1880, barely 18 months after being knighted. Yet, despite the results presented by the court, speculation still remains concerning the case all around. Today, there are three main theories that are offered to explain the collapse. Theory 1 pictures a vertical waveform amplified by the storm, which essentially shook the bridge apart when it made contact. A second theory imagines the train itself came off the track by the wind, and an axle hit a crucial part of the bridge or the higher girders, which essentially shot a shockwave vertically down the supporting pillar of the bridge itself, and causing the entire collapse. Now, the third theory, which agrees with the court, argues that the force of the wind on the bridge was set up by a domino effect, whereby, one after another, the upper courses of masonry on the bridge piers became detached from the lower courses, thus tilting the bridge downwards. Combine this with an already passing train, it definitely spells disaster. But despite this tragedy, work would have to begin on either repairs or a second Tay Bridge. Ultimately, they would choose the latter, and work on this would begin in 1882. This second bridge was built upstream and parallel to the old bridge, with the completed structure undergoing an intense examination by inspectors, and eventually it would enter service on July 11th of 1887. Looking across the Tay, you can still see the stumps of the original bridge piers, which even still are visible above the surface. There have also been memorials placed on the Dundee and Fife sides of the bridge. 3 very large panels made of pure granite not only tell the story of the disaster, but also list those lost in it. And a column from the original Tay Bridge sits on display at the Dundee Transport Museum. In terms of recovery, only 46 bodies of the known 75 victims were ever found. The locomotive, while being dropped during retrieval, was eventually recovered and returned to service. A 440 locomotive, the same one you are seeing here, as well as the tender of the locomotive, was also pulled up from the wreck site. In this image, we can see 2 wagons holding the wrecked salvage of a recovered coach. And in this image, arguably the most haunting, fallen girders with remains of a wooden train carriage inside of it. Almost every bridge made by Bouch was re-examined following this disaster, and it just so happens many of them had similar issues found here, and thank God they were found before anything like this could have been repeated. But it's kind of sad it had to happen the first time. In my opinion, the number one way to honor these victims is to not only never forget them, but also to put in the steps to make sure they're never followed. Even if it comes at the end of our story, at least there's that, and some sort of shining light at the end of this tunnel.